Catherine Howard's life reads, like a cautionary tale wrapped in silk and lace, set against the sumptuous but treacherous backdrop of King Henry VIII's Tudor court. Born around 1523, she was a member of the extended and ambitious Howard family, yet her childhood was hardly the sheltered, cosseted upbringing one might expect of a noble daughter. Instead, her early years were marked by financial strain, inattentive guardians, and an atmosphere at once permissive and dangerous. By the time she arrived at court as a teenager, she had already tasted the forbidden rush of illicit affections. What she couldn't have known was that these secrets would one day catch up to her in the most catastrophic way possible, costing not just her position, but her life. In that era, everything about who you were and what you could become depended on family lineage. Catherine's father, Lord Edmund Howard, was a noble in name but not in wealth. The Howard clan was powerful overall, particularly under the leadership of her uncle, Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk. But Edmund struggled with finances, and the extended family had little inclination to bail him out. As a result, Catherine's upbringing was filled with material precariousness, a far cry from the gilded existence most might imagine for a young aristocrat. She spent her formative years mostly under the care of her step-grandmother, Agnes Howard, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, living in scattered households such as Chesworth and Lambeth. These places had the veneer of aristocratic respectability, but they weren't exactly the well-supervised training grounds for budding ladies of impeccable virtue. That lack of adult oversight proved to be a defining factor in Catherine's early adolescence. By the time she was in her early teens, if not younger, she found herself sharing dormitories with other female wards, many of whom had their own flirtations, secrets, and occasional nighttime visitors. This was a world of half-whispered giggles, passing notes, and stolen kisses. In modern terms, might sound like teenage experimentation, but in the 16th century, any hint of premarital intimacy held the potential to explode into a life-altering scandal. Catherine was a product of that environment, swept along by peer pressure, curiosity, and a longing for attention. One of her earliest entanglements, around 1536, involved a music teacher named Henry Mannix. By Catherine's own later testimony, this liaison wasn't fully sexual, but it was certainly improper enough to be dangerous if discovered. Scholars still debate whether Mannix coerced Catherine or simply took advantage of her youth and naivete. Regardless, the situation laid bare a grim truth. Catherine was vulnerable, unprotected by the family circle that should have been guiding her, and living in a household where supervision was lax to the point of non-existent. She was, in essence, a child learning about adult relationships in a setting that neither protected her nor trained her in the real consequences of such dalliances. Shortly after the Mannix episode, Catherine became involved with Francis Dereham, a man employed as a sort of household secretary within the Duchess of Norfolk's sphere. Unlike her flirtations with Mannix, her relationship with Dereham appears to have been more serious. Gossip circulated that they shared a promise or understanding of marriage, a pre-contract, as it was known in Tudor law, which carried significant weight at the time. If a pre-contract was recognized, it could be grounds to nullify any later marriage, even one to a king, should evidence ever surface. This detail would prove catastrophic once Catherine was on the throne. And so, by the late 1530s, Catherine Howard was a young woman with a complicated romantic history. Hardly a hardened schemer or an experienced temptress, she was still in her mid-teens. She nevertheless carried secrets that could spell ruin if they came to light. Enter the figure who would change her life forever, Henry VIII. By 1539, this king, nearly 50 years old, plagued by ill health, and increasingly irascible, had recently married his fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, in an attempt to forge a political alliance with German Protestant states. That marriage, from Henry's perspective, was a fiasco. He found Anne physically unappealing and quickly sought to extricate himself from the union. Meanwhile, Catherine arrived at court as one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting, chosen perhaps because her family connections placed her in line for a prestigious post. For the newly arrived teenage girl, the sight of King Henry VIII in person must have been both thrilling and intimidating. He was still formidable in stature, though heavier, and in his youthful prime, and his legendary temper, had not mellowed over the years. Catherine, fresh-faced and vivacious, caught his eye. Historians debate whether she truly loved him, or whether she was encouraged by the Howard clan, particularly her powerful uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, to seize a chance that could bring the entire family closer to the seat of power. Maybe it was both. Perhaps Catherine was flattered by the attention and dazzled by the prospect of being queen, and her ambitious relatives were all too happy to nudge her along. Henry's infatuation with Catherine was immediate and intense. It's said that he called her his rose without a thorn, a phrase also, though apocryphally, attributed to other wives or favorites. He showered her with jewels, dresses, and gifts. By summer 1540, he had maneuvered to annul his marriage to Anne of Cleves, a process that went surprisingly smoothly, as Anne herself agreed to step aside in exchange for a generous settlement. Virtually the moment that marriage was dissolved, Henry wedded Catherine in a private ceremony on July 28, 1540, at Oatlands Palace. She was, by most estimates, around 16 or 17 years old. He was nearly 50. The king's courtiers, ever alert to shifts in power, quickly flocked to the new queen's side, hoping for favor. For Catherine, it must have felt like a heady dream. One day, a lady-in-waiting; the next day, Queen of England. Yet with great rank came an avalanche of expectations. Catherine found herself installed in a role once occupied by the famously doomed Anne Boleyn, also a cousin of Catherine's through the Howard connection, and by the more diplomatic Jane Seymour, who had died in childbirth. The entire court was watching her every move. Each gesture and word weighed for significance. Henry, adoring though he might have seemed at first, was also known to turn on anyone who disappointed him. Court life was a gauntlet of hidden traps, allegiances, and potential betrayals. And Catherine's youth and background ill-prepared her for such a high-stakes environment. In her initial months as queen, Catherine moved cautiously, trying to solidify her standing. She intervened to help certain family members, particularly those of the Howard lineage, win positions in favor. She also managed to charm Henry enough that he lavishly praised her, publicly lauding her grace and sweetness in stark contrast to how he had complained about Anne of Cleves. But Catherine couldn't escape the influences of those around her. The Howard family, historically aligned with Catholic interests at court, was locked in a power struggle with the more reformist faction led by figures like Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Even as she tried to enjoy her new status, Catherine was a pawn in these larger power games. It was during the summer of 1541 that the most fateful decision of Catherine's life began to take shape. She became romantically involved with a gentleman of the king's privy chamber, Thomas Culpeper, who was also, adding an extra layer of complexity, a distant relative of hers. Culpeper was close to the king, known for his charm, and was rumored to have a way with women that transcended social barriers. The motivations for Catherine's affair remain a hotly debated topic. Did she genuinely fall in love? Was she merely seeking excitement in a stifling marriage to an older, ailing man? Or was she trying to secure her position, perhaps believing that if Henry died from his ailments, she might find safety by allying with a younger courtier? We can't know for certain, but it's likely that youthful attraction, boredom, and a sense of invincibility all played roles. Facilitating these clandestine meetings was Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, widow of George Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's brother, and herself no stranger to controversy. The Queen's secret rendezvous with Culpeper, often late at night and in carefully chosen locations, were fraught with peril. The entire royal household traveled on a progress to the north of England in the summer of 1541, visiting Lincoln, Pontefract, and other places. Far from the rigid routines of London, Catherine and Culpeper found opportunities to meet in quiet chambers and hidden corridors, with Lady Rochford standing guard or making discreet arrangements. All it would take was one slip of the tongue, one suspicious servant for the rumor mill to start churning. And that's exactly what happened. Word reached Thomas Cranmer that the Queen might harbor a scandalous past and that she was possibly entangled in new improprieties. It's believed that political rivals to the Howard family, eager to unseat their influence, seized upon these rumors and fed them to Cranmer and other reformist courtiers. By November 1541, the walls began to close in on Catherine. What truly set off the chain reaction was the revelation of her prior relationship with Frances Dereham. Mary Lascelles, a woman who had once been part of the same household as Catherine, came forward, allegedly at her brother's urging, to testify that Catherine and Dereham had been intimately involved. In Tudor England, discovering that your queen had essentially promised herself to another man before marrying the king was a legal and moral bombshell. And if that weren't enough, the existence of love letters, particularly one where Catherine supposedly wrote, "Yours as long as life endures," pointed toward an ongoing affair with Culpeper. Some argued that her relationship with Dereham ended before she became queen, making it irrelevant, but the lines between past and present sins were swiftly blurred. Henry VIII, upon learning of these allegations, was reportedly devastated, humiliated, and enraged. The same man who had annihilated wives and courtiers for lesser offenses was not about to show mercy to a queen who betrayed him. Indeed, once the accusations reached a certain threshold, it was almost guaranteed that Catherine would face condemnation. On November 7th, 1541, Henry left Hampton Court in distress, and not long afterward, Catherine was stripped of her royal privileges, confined to her chambers, and interrogated. At first, she denied everything, but as the net tightened, she could no longer keep the facade. She admitted to her earlier affair with Dereham, but maintained that nothing truly treasonous had happened with Culpeper, that they had not consummated their relationship. From the king's perspective, that was irrelevant. Even the suggestion of adultery in a queen could be grounds for treason charges. Dereham and Culpeper were arrested, tried, and convicted. Dereham, who lacked the social standing to negotiate a cleaner death, was executed by hanging, drawing, and quartering, one of the most brutal forms of capital punishment. Culpeper, due to his higher status, received the relatively merciful sentence of beheading. Both men died on December 10th, 1541. This left Catherine in an impossible position. Unlike Henry's second wife, Anne Boleyn, who was given a trial, however much of a farce it may have been, Catherine didn't face a full judicial proceeding. Instead, she was condemned by an act of attainder, a parliamentary mechanism that declared her guilty of treason without the necessity of presenting evidence in a formal court. In the eyes of the law, the queen was to be punished for betraying the king's trust, no matter the specifics of her relationships. Lady Rochford, implicated as an accomplice in facilitating the affair, was likewise condemned. Catherine's final weeks were spent in the Tower of London. She was around 19 years old at the time, though some argue she might have been 18 or even younger. Her physical and emotional state deteriorated. The once vivacious teenager, who had delighted Henry with her youth and charm, now lingered in a cold fortress, awaiting the stroke of an executioner's axe. On February 13th, 1542, the day of her beheading, she was led out to Tower Green, a private courtyard within the tower walls. According to eyewitness accounts, she looked frail, but composed. She offered a short speech acknowledging her fate and asking for forgiveness for her sins, though historians still debate the exact wording. Some say she lamented not having been better educated. Others claim her final words reflected acceptance of the justice about to be meted out, which, under the circumstances, might have been the only safe declaration to make. Standing on the scaffold, Catherine Howard, presumably understood that this moment would seal her place in history. Her cousin Anne Boleyn had met a similar fate a mere 6 years earlier. Catherine's remains were interred in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, near Anne's resting place. For centuries, her grave went unmarked. One more victim of Henry VIII's relentless pursuit of heirs, stability, and absolute control over his court. In the aftermath of her death, King Henry VIII and Parliament passed stricter laws, effectively criminalizing not just adultery by a queen, but also any concealment of her sexual past. These measures were designed to prevent another situation in which a queen's undisclosed background could bring scandal, or perhaps to protect a king from ever being so blindsided again. But for Catherine, none of these legislative changes mattered. She had become another cautionary tale in the ever-expanding roster of Henry's ill-fated wives. Catherine Howard's name endures as both a warning and a lament. A warning about the lethal dance of power, where a single misstep can destroy you, and a lament for a girl who should have had the freedom to make mistakes and learn from them, rather than paying with her head. In that sense, her legacy resonates across the centuries, reminding us of how precarious and fragile life can be when tethered to a crown, especially in a court where the king's favor could vanish faster than a candle flame in the wind. And so we leave her story here, echoing through the austere corridors of the Tower of London, her silent grave, a testament to the truth that some lessons in political theater come at the highest conceivable price.